Your administration said the water was safe.
I'm a journalist. I'm just asking residents on this block if the state ever came to test your water.
April 25th marks 5 years since the city of Flint, Michigan has had clean drinking water. And ahead of that anniversary, the documentary Flushing Flint will be released, detailing the crisis that has continued to plague that community. Joining us via Skype to shed light on the current state of Flint and on the documentary is journalist Jordan Chariton. He's also the CEO of Status Coup, the production company behind Flushing Flint. Thanks so much for being with us, Jordan.
Thanks for having me.
So bring us up to speed. What is the status of the water in Flint today?
Well, if you listen to the former governor, Rick Snyder, and his administration, it's just fine and meeting all regulations. That's actually what our documentary is about. My partner and I actually knocked on a lot of doors over the summer and fall of last year. Based on sourcing, we had reason to believe that the water testing that declaration is based on was compromised. So we started knocking on doors, and ultimately, after knocking on 450 doors and speaking with well over 150 residents, we found evidence that the state environmental agency, which, if people don't know what happened in the Flint water crisis, the state environmental agency basically did not add the proper corrosion control chemicals to the water, and that's why the lead leached off and poisoned people. The state environmental agency was improperly running people's water before taking samples, which is actually against EPA regulations. It gives you a false lower reading. So we found that the testing was manipulated. So unfortunately, there really can't be a definitive answer because the testing was compromised. And that's led to the Attorney General's office has now met with us and can't really go into details, but it's further looking into what we found.
So basically what's happened here is the lines were, this is what you found for talking to residents, that the lines were being flushed before the tests were being conducted, creating a lower reading than would have been the case if you had just opened the tap and tested the water the way that you were supposed to.
Yes. So I don't want to get too complicated for people, but essentially the EPA's main drinking water regulation says that if you're testing for lead and copper and you're trying to meet EPA regulations, you have to totally not use your water for at least 6 hours and then take it as a first draw sample, which basically means turn the tap on, put the sample bottle in right away, because if you run the water even for 30 seconds, you could be flushing out a whole lot of lead. So we found that state officials were both going into homes and flushing before taking samples, as well as verbally telling residents who were testing themselves to flush. And why it's important, the EPA actually confirmed for us, state officials weren't even supposed to be going into residents' homes. The testing program was simply supposed to be, you drop the kits at people's homes, written instructions, the residents take the sample, and then they leave it for the state to pick up. So it's pretty, I mean, Erin Brockovich in our story basically said this is a crime. I mean, it's falsifying water tests. And really what's most disconcerting about it is these officials were doing this right while the residents, in some cases with their children right there, were standing there. And they were just happy that, oh, officials are here and they're taking care of it.
Yeah, they'll do it properly.
Right. So it's very concerning because we've seen a lot of stories from media outlets, comparing other cities with lead in water to Flint and saying other cities have way worse lead levels. But I think what our story and this documentary will show is the testing that those declarations are based on is not credible. And that's why the Attorney General's office met with us in February.
Yeah, and I don't know that other cities have it worse is really a good defense. I mean, just so people are clear, there is no safe level of lead to have in your body. So any level of lead is really unacceptable. Jordan, what are residents, what is their sense of the safety? Do they trust the water to drink at this point? Or are people still, bottled water, at least in terms of cooking and drinking?
No, that's a definitive no.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to Flint going on 13 different trips, and I can't, maybe a handful of people in the people I've spoken with trust it, but the most people do not. And that's because it goes beyond the water. I mean, the state of Michigan, in fairness to the new administration, which is Democrat, under Rick Snyder, I mean, it was lie after lie, cover up after cover up. And also, I think what the media has kind of dropped the ball on, and a lot of other stories too, but they kind of just breathlessly regurgitated what the EPA and the state officials were telling them. But this door knocking we did last summer, people are still actively getting rashes from the water. People are still losing hair from the water. People are still, coming up with all sorts of autoimmune things, which happens years after the lead poisoning that happened 5 years ago will start manifesting into new illnesses. But in terms of active, visible things, people are still getting rashes, hair loss. I've spoken with people getting nosebleeds. So when you're reading stories and hearing from politicians or media, the water's again meeting EPA regulations, you have to wonder, well, we have the video to prove it. Why are people getting rashes? I met a 1-year-old baby. They had just moved in to this home on Wolcott Avenue in Flint. She has white blisters all over her legs, arms, and ears. Oh. The mother was putting her in the bath for 20 to 30 minutes. She's not getting that from watching TV, Krystal. So you'll see it in this documentary. I really hope people watch it because I think we've talked about this, but President Trump's important. Don't get me wrong. Russia's important. But an American city 5 years later does not have clean drinking water. That says something about our culture. It's been normalized, and that should not be normalized.
And Jordan, what's going to happen to these kids who were poisoned?
I don't want to play doctor, but unfortunately, I remember, it haunts me, but I remember talking to a child on a porch at this same home I just described. And I was, he was reciting the alphabet for me. He stopped at like J. His mother said he used to know the whole thing. Same thing with kids, reciting numbers. One kid stopped at like 12, used to know up to like 30. I mean, you have major behavioral problems now with children, developmental illnesses. And obviously now they're children, but those behavioral issues can then lead to crime. And the resources have not been there. And when we're talking about, I don't know if you guys are covering it, Bernie Sanders' town hall on Fox, there's never once been a discussion about shouldn't these residents have some access to Medicare for all or something? This is not something that they did. It was done to them. I've spoken with residents that are now 20, 30,000 out of pocket because their health care, that the expanded Medicaid and things they got does not cover environmental doctors. A lot of regular doctors don't know how to deal with lead poisoning. And we should also add, it's not just lead. There were other things found in that water. General Motors was dumping its waste in the Flint River for a century. So it's a big problem. And I hope people, when they watch the documentary, Ty Bayless, our photojournalist, did an amazing job on it. I hope they realize that this is not just a story about water poisoning. It's a story about a very poor community that was poisoned and then kind of like left to fend for itself. And that's concerning.
Jordan, you did incredible work on this. You really hit the ground, talked to residents, got the real story. How can people watch the film?
Yeah, it premieres April 23rd, so 2 days before the 5-year anniversary, and it will be available on FlushingFlint.com.
All right, Jordan Chariton, great to see you. Thank you, and congrats again.
Thanks, Krystal.
We'll have more Rising after this.